West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
Kids in Texas are back to school this week. However, for the almost 200,000 public school students in Houston, the largest school district by far in Texas, this year is on track to be very different. That's because this past June, the state of Texas took over the Houston public schools following what they called inadequate test scores. The state started by removing elected school board members and ushering in a new superintendent who in turn announced a, quote, new education system. In that system, discipline is prioritized over libraries and books. Over the summer, librarian jobs were eliminated in 28 schools across Houston. Some of the libraries have been repurposed, turned into so-called team centers, meant for disciplining students who misbehave in class. This change sparked outcry across the heavily Democratic city, where over 80% of the kids in schools are black and Hispanic. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton is covering all of this on the ground in Houston, and she brings us this report.
Lately, Houston mom Lauren Simmons struggles to recognize her own city. She came up through the very same school system that her 3rd and 11th grader now attend. But this year, her daughter's school won't have a full library.
It's been a real struggle for me because I should just be able to wake up, drive my kids 5 minutes down the street, and they be at schools that are filled with great educators, that have all of the fancy, programs and after-school programs, and that's just not our reality.
What did the library mean to you when you were a kid coming up in this same system?
The library was everything. I'm the kid that's checking out 10 books, and then I'm checking out 10 more books, and I'm at home under the cover reading books.
Over the summer, dozens of Houston schools replaced their libraries with team centers, where students will do work or go when they misbehave. Many librarians were laid off or reassigned to new jobs. The changes overwhelmingly impacted Black and Latino neighborhoods, so Lauren and other moms spent their summer going to meetings and protests, demanding to be heard.
I want you to look in my face and remember me because I'm your new best friend.
That sign is right.
Republicans have made parental rights a centerpiece of the GOP platform, arguing that parents have the right to demand that books be removed from schools, that lessons on race and gender be restricted. But this spring, when the state of Texas took over the Houston Independent School District of almost 200,000 kids, in a blue city, in a red state, there was little outcry from those same parental rights activists. The state replaced their elected school board members. They pushed out the superintendent.
So taking these principles to
and brought in former Dallas superintendent and charter school founder Mike Miles. Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner thinks the move is anti-democratic.
I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it. It's a hostile takeover where the people are not accountable to the parents, or the teachers, or the local community, or the students. They're appointed by the people at the state.
Is Houston in conflict with its own state government?
Well, Houston has been in conflict with its own state government for years. What's happening here with HISD cannot be viewed separate and apart from the greater picture. Okay, so let's not be fooled.
For years, a number of Houston schools were failing. Parents pleaded for more resources as large numbers of students fell far behind on reading and math. Former district leaders tried to implement new programs, and the state gave them a B rating in 2022. The Texas Education Agency took over HISD anyway. Superintendent Mike Miles' new education system model will emphasize instruction time in the classroom and use team centers like these for the kids who are excelling and the kids who need a timeout. He understands families are anxious about change. He believes it was necessary.
What message do you think is sent to kids, though, who see classmates in other parts of the city who still have functioning, staffed libraries?
So I think kids like to learn. I think kids focus on their schools, and so I think the kids are going to be fine. I think they are very flexible, adaptable. You've seen them already on the first day.
I've spoken to some of the kids in your district. Mm-hmm. One third grader told me that it made her feel angry. Mm-hmm. One fifth grader told me that it made her feel like she's a bad kid who doesn't deserve a library.
So when they come to school, what I've heard and what my staff has heard is nothing but, oh, this is okay. So I think people need to get here. I think the kids will adapt and they will love school like you see kids learning here.
Do you believe librarians are important?
So every single position has value, and it has, a role to play in different places. We can't be all things to all people, and we can't have everything we want. So there's a prioritization that has to happen. Science of reading versus this position.
So does that mean you're robbing Peter to pay Paul?
No, I wouldn't phrase it that way. What I would say is we're putting in a bold, different model that works.
But parents like Lauren say their wishes are being ignored by the school system.
Do parents here feel heard?
I'm having to literally fight and yell from the rooftops that my children deserve a library. Even prisons have libraries.
Cheryl Hensley worked for HISD for 39 years. She was Lauren's second grade teacher before she became a librarian. She was laid off as part of the takeover.
If we just focus on the classroom, that's just part of the kid. That's just part of your community. I'm building a lifelong learner. I'm building beyond the teacher. I'm giving them a choice. They're going to the classroom and they're told they have to pass this test. They have to read this passage. They have to do these strategies. When they come to me, they're given a book that they choose. They get a book that they want to read.
Was it hard to leave your school?
Extremely hard. I still go by. I don't want to be done. I know these kids were important to me. And I felt like I loved every single one of them.
Lauren says the library that was a lifeline for her as a kid is worth fighting for.
What are my rights as a parent? Are my children not entitled to a quality education in their neighborhood? Like, where does that fit into my American dream? The pursuit of happiness and life and liberty. I don't feel very happy right now. I don't feel very liberated. I don't feel very free. I feel very frustrated. I feel very unheard. And I feel like my children in this district, are being treated like political football.
Lauren's son James can already read well, but her daughter Sydney struggles with dyslexia.
I think sometimes people forget that there are real people that are impacted by this. Seriously, what am I supposed to do for my baby girl who is doing her best?
They lived in a house in the woods. I don't know why people need to take a library away for no reason. It doesn't make sense, because it's really hard to see a thing that you love to just be poof and gone.
The library was one of Sydney's favorite spaces at school. You're going into third grade. that's an important year for reading.
Yes.
What are you hoping to still learn? What kind of help do you need?
I need help with words, and I need to read a lot.
What message do you think it sends to you to go to a school that doesn't have a library?
That kids just shouldn't read, or kids like us shouldn't read.
Kids shouldn't read, or kids like us shouldn't read. The city of Houston is run by the Democratic mayor, Sylvester Turner, whom you saw in Antonia's story. In the 2020 presidential election, Harris County, where Houston is located, went blue, as it has in every presidential election since 2008. Joe Biden won the county by more than 13 percentage points. Harris County is one of the most diverse counties in the entire state of Texas. The school district is no different. More than 80% of the 200,000 students enrolled in Houston's independent school district are black and Latino. And the Republican-led state of Texas is focused on improving the district's test scores by taking away their school libraries. The state-appointed superintendent has instituted a new plan for this school year that will transform the libraries and many of the schools into centers of discipline, literally replacing books with isolation. Mayor Turner says the library plan is creating a prison-like atmosphere in spaces typically associated with learning. NBC's correspondent Antonia Hilton spent a few days in Houston talking to parents and students about these new changes and what it means for their communities. Antonia, literally nobody tells these important stories of our time better than you do. But that last thing you had in your story, that boy saying that kids shouldn't read, or kids like us shouldn't read. I don't know if he recognized that in American history, particularly in the South, particularly in Texas, that was a thing that his ancestors may have faced, a deliberate effort to make sure that certain people did not read. They could not attain self-sufficiency. They could not, in those days, get away from their owners and captors. But in this day, it also keeps people in their place. That was a remarkably resonant piece of a very remarkably resonant story.
Thank you, Allie. You know, that boy is actually a ferocious reader, so he may well know all the history you spelled out right there. And that's really the weight that a lot of these families of color here in Houston are feeling right now. You know, nobody thinks that the school didn't need any kind of reform or change. In fact, in all of the years in which the state was criticizing Houston ISD, the parents were too. They wanted more for their kids. They wanted more resources. They were asking the state for more money. They wanted new programs. They wanted interventionists to help their kids catch up with reading and math. So nobody was saying, you know, nothing here needs to change and the status quo was fine. So they agree with the superintendent on that. But I think for these families who are seeing some of their kids struggle to read and struggle to find points in the day at school, right, where they can also just relax, be themselves, have fun, curl up with a book, the library meant something to them. It meant a lot for those kids to go into that space, to make a decision, a choice about what they wanted to explore that day, and really have agency in that room. And so that's the question that parents tell me they're asking this administration, you know, where is our agency? You know, now that we've lost our elected representatives, where do we get a seat at the table? And if we're going to make all these changes, okay, some changes are good, but what say do we have? And will you partner with us before you move ahead with them? That's sort of what's at stake here. And they see this history and what could happen to kids who look like them, Allie.
So you spoke to the new non-elected appointed superintendent. And I thought something he said was very interesting. When you asked him specifically about libraries, it was stark. I mean, I can't imagine such a thing. I've known of the story for several weeks, but I've not seen the imagery that there are literally libraries without books in them. He said, we can't be all things to all people. We can't have everything we want. I think it's reasonable to say that. We can't have everything we want. We can't be all things to all people. But there are virtually no students in this country who will tell you that the library, whether at school or otherwise, was not central to the being of a child who enjoyed education. So, yeah, can't be all things to all people, but why the libraries? Of all the things to cut, why the libraries?
Well, he sees himself as a reformer. He has a large network of charter schools at which he's implemented this new education system and says that he's seen a track record of success. And here's the logic behind it. that if they're able to take resources, focus more time on instruction in the classroom, and use some of the way in which they've reorganized and removed some positions to increase some teachers' pay, that then those teachers will succeed. They will go above and beyond. They'll do more for kids in the classroom, and kids will get more of that reading instruction and all other kinds of instruction to really catch up with the rest of the state. And so it's not that he doesn't think kids should still read, but he thinks that the library might not necessarily have to be the space for that, that there are other points in the day where kids are going to be able to, of course, read through their ELA classes, through English, read as part of assignments. What librarians have said to me is that they did a whole lot more than just check out books or stand there as kids read, that they found kids who, maybe weren't really that into reading, and they helped them find subjects that they were inspired by, that they would give kids the next book in a series so that they would keep falling in love with reading and in love with authors, that they also would teach classes, to help kids figure out the difference between fact and fiction. How do you evaluate sources? How do you start to cite sources in your first school papers? And librarians were playing all of these roles. And so their concern is, this is so much bigger than, just how do the shelves look in a big room. It's about that culture, all of the pieces and the joy and love of learning that go with it. We got the chance to go inside of the team center, and you can see some of it in the story there, where there are rows and rows of desks in what used to be a library. And then along the wall, there are a lot of these shelves where kids are going to be able to, either at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day before they go to the bus, grab books sort of on an honors system. And kids may well do that. We didn't get to see any kids actually do that today. But the other piece that librarians are concerned about is that, if the books are just there in the corners and along the walls, kids are going to forget about the library, and it just won't be a focal part of school culture anymore.
It is Thursday, the 31st of August of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life, just a little. Okay, well, how are ya? I'm pretty livid about this Houston library story and the takeover of the Houston schools as a whole. That story's been pretty much at the forefront here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We did report about these Houston school district issues for quite some time. But this is one of the more comprehensive takedowns of a hostile takeover. Yes, indeed. So I just decided let's put it all on, and we did. So I don't know about you, but I was pretty young when I got my first library card, and it was I don't know, was as a feeling, a sense of freedom as I had when I had a bicycle. Like, you could just go. At least we could back in the day. I suppose all these snowflake parents now who are so afraid of the world. Oh my God, the world. Oh my God, my baby. I guess that's what's happening. They've been brainwashed into believing that they have to be, I don't know, afraid. Yeah. That's exactly what they've been, programmed for, I guess. A certain segment. A certain very loud and whining segment. Anyway, we know what's going on in Houston. But to get back to this sense of freedom I had when I got my library card. My parents didn't think that dropping their kid off at the library was giving them over to the hands of, indoctrinated groomers. They're going to indoctrinate my kid. To what? Believing that everybody is equal. No, what they're doing is that they're letting the kid read. These parents are afraid their kids are going to know more than they do. That's what this is about. The reason we send our kids to school is we expect our children to know more than we do. We want that. Damn it. But I can understand, certain parents who, might be threatened by that, especially if there's been something untoward going on, Even if there hasn't. We know the authoritarian types. I see them within my own extended family. I don't want my kid reading that. Well, okay, great. Bet you they already have. But, hey. So I love the library. I couldn't get enough books to read. And I grew up in a house that had, well over 17,000 books just at home. In my dad's library. And his office. The home office library. Pretty big room. And then he had more than that at the university. So I had access to all of that at home. And, when we were little kids, get the kids out of the parents' hair. Let's get them to the library. Because my parents didn't think reading was bad. And there's librarians there, too, to kind of direct you. Because, the reason there's a kids' room is not to sort of limit the kids' reading to kids' books. But you know how kids are. They're rambunctious. Let's, kettle them in this area over here. So you don't disturb the adult patrons. So now it's morphed into this idea of the reason we have a kiddie section is to keep the kids, into just being kiddies. No. It's because your kid is a brat. And we're just trying to keep the library quiet. Shh. All right. Those parents aren't sending their kids to the library. It's an afterthought. Library, what's that? I just love the fact that the least capable students from back in the day now want homeschooling. They're going to be able to teach their kid about strange quarks. They can't even teach them proper grammar. Give me a break. Yeah, I'm in this discussion once again with this Bircher anti-government. Let's get rid of the schools. Homeschooling is great. Oh, yeah. Who says that, people who learn, out there in the real world, they ultimately know more than the educated elite. Do they? If they do, then why can't they construct a sentence properly? And you want their kids to be that taught that way? I guess what has happened is that standards have just gone out the window. There are no standards for homeschooling. That's why you can have Nazi homeschools in Ohio and they can't do anything about it. Or won't. Yep. I'm serious. Nazi homeschool conglomerate got exposed. And the state said, it's okay. I just want to know if there's any Taliban madrasas anywhere. I don't think so. Or is it madrasa? I was pronouncing how you would in the heartland. Madras. Am I bitter? Yeah, damn right I'm bitter. I'm bitter that these deplorables have gotten to where they are. Boy, Birchers used to be, kept these extremists in their place. Now they got a place at the table, not only at the table, at the head of the table. You got Marjorie Taylor Greene out there saying 2.1 billion was destroyed by BLM and Antifa, which is a lie. Some right-wing rag that call themselves an insurance watchdog group speculated that it could be. It could be. They don't have any evidence. Show me the appropriations that you can aggregate together that comes up with $2.1 billion in damages that were repaired. There's no appropriations for any of that. How much does it take to clean up a burned dumpster? Because that's what we saw. A tight shot of a burning dumpster, for instance, in Portland in front of the federal courthouse. And we saw the same image night after night after night. And Fox and the whole right-wing media propaganda machine said, our cities are burning. And people believed it, and they believe it still. Yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene is upset that some January 6th people, defendants, are getting the hammer brought down on them and going to jail for some hard time. Well, she asked for a pardon. To get a pardon, you have to commit a crime. What crime did she commit that was so severe that she needed a presidential pardon? 2 words. Pipe bomb. I know. But I still like the idea it could be her. It looks like her. It does. All right. Since we had such a long opening, and here I am just going overboard once again, why don't we give you a rundown about the curated part of the show where we actually have some order. And we do. And what do we have in store for you in the Bistro Cafe here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, public defenders sued an Oregon county over systemic courthouse racism. A Trump supporter in court for sentencing faced the election official he violently threatened. And the Los Angeles City Council wants to sue Texas and its governor for sending over a dozen busloads of asylum seekers to the city since June 14th and investigate whether Abbott's actions violated any criminal laws. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Cyprus police arrested 21 people who were wearing hoods and brandishing bats who tried to attack Syrian refugees. And Guatemalan prosecutors arrested the former representative of a United Nations-backed anti-corruption commission that was expelled from the country several years ago. A harbinger of what could happen if you let Trump back in office. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. Across the page to the left from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and maybe if you could send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, if you could send those funds to us once a month, it really does help us pay our bills and keep this powerhouse of resistance resisting as the founders originally intended so many years ago. And we do thank you for your generosity, and we pre-thank people for possibly being generous in the present or the near future, because it's embarrassing, but we need the help. So thank you for your help and generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, now we're going to keep calling it that, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, etc. And, while we're still on Twitter, because we're going to be bugging out, I'm sure, soon. And anyway, you can do so by going to @NetRootsRadio. Tom takes care of all of those and a lot more, so thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, wherever, @Justice Putnam. I incidentally post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. I just put it in queue. Say when I want it published, and it does. And I say I want it published 10 minutes before showtime, and there it is. But nonetheless, if you follow my social media feeds, you'll have quick access to those links, and you can read the actual articles and view the actual clips of news that are in the show notes and links, so go there. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, it's just a placemat. We'll do a lot more on these other platforms real soon, I promise. But you can go to Twitter and find the show at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Just not Stitcher, and you know why, because of SiriusXM. You know why. Alrighty. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Jonathan Levinson from Oregon Public Broadcasting. On the afternoon of August 2nd, 22 people gathered in Washington County Courtroom 202C. Just 2 were women of color. Defendant Kathy Rapati and her lawyer, Washington County Public Defender Chloe Clay. For Clay, that is the norm. Where is Washington County? Right up there in Portland. Just letting you know. It's very lonely, she said recently. In order for me to be able to make it through the days, I kind of have to forget about it a little bit, or else I wouldn't be able to do my job. Rapati, age 27, was charged with several misdemeanors following a fight with her former roommate. She was in court that day for what's known as a Brady hearing, essentially a meeting at which Clay would argue that the prosecutor in the case had intentionally withheld evidence that undermined the state's only witness. Earlier that morning, after a separate hearing to change the terms of Rapati's pretrial release from custody, Deputy District Attorney Dan Hessen wrote the public defender, "Tisk, tisk, Ms. Clay," Hessen's email began, before going on to suggest she had brought up issues in the hearing she shouldn't have. On a scale of 1 to 10, how awesome is my ability to predict what you are going to do? Clay thinks Hessen knew his tone was inappropriate. Unlike the rest of their emails back and forth that morning, he didn't copy court staff on this one. She said she found the email nasty and personal. It was also one in a string of recent incidents in which Clay and another female lawyer of color say they experienced demeaning and racist behavior from Washington County prosecutors, judges, and sheriff's deputies. Washington County judges and prosecutors have a reputation among lawyers who practice there for being particularly aggressive and unforgiving in the way they treat both defendants and defense attorneys. Clay says that as a black woman, she is afforded even less grace and has faced discrimination, disrespect, and far harsher treatment than her white colleagues. The Washington County District Attorney's Office declined to comment pending litigation. It's not the first time the office has been accused of racism. In 2019, the Oregon Court of Appeals overturned a black man's conviction after they concluded the prosecutor in the case, now District Attorney Kevin Barton, had struck the lone black juror from the jury. Clay filed a lawsuit in Washington County Circuit Court on Tuesday, the day before yesterday, over one specific incident. On November 14th of 2022, Clay alleges Washington County Sheriff's Office Deputy David Lyle prevented her from entering a public courtroom while at the same time allowing white attorneys to enter without issue. Aline Sanchez, a Latina Washington County public defender, filed a separate lawsuit on Tuesday alleging, among other things, a nearly identical incident with the same deputy. Wingett Sanchez of the Washington Post brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. The election officials piled into the front row of a federal courtroom, a show of support for a local public official who has endured more than 2 years of attacks for his role in helping to certify Donald Trump's loss in Arizona in 2020. Clint Hickman's simple act, which was required by law and his oath as chairman of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, resulted in hundreds of mostly anonymous threats. Hickman, a 58-year-old Republican who has served as a supervisor for a decade, says he is so tired of election denialism and hostility toward rank-and-file staff that he's not yet decided if he will run for re-election next year. On Monday, he came face-to-face with one of his harassers. Mark Reese, a 65-year-old from Iowa who has worked in customer service in recent years, walked into the courtroom using a cane. He slowly passed Hickman as he made his way to the defendant's table. In April, he pleaded guilty to sending threatening communications to Hickman and the state's former Attorney General, Mark Brnovich, also a Republican. He was in court to receive his punishment. The remarkable scene in the Phoenix Federal Courthouse this week reflected the extent to which the institutions of American politics and justice continue to grapple with the fallout of Trump's false claims of widespread voter fraud, which swept many of his supporters into a frenzy and led to an onslaught of threats and attacks on local officials who merely did their jobs, carrying out the election and then accepting the results. Now, many of those who embrace the threat of violence or violence itself as they question the election results are facing federal prosecutors and having to explain their actions and often face consequences. Reese came into Hickman's life on September 27th of 2021, nearly a year after the election and days after the conclusion of a partisan and unreliable review of 2.1 million ballots cast by Maricopa County voters that affirmed Joe Biden's win. That review garnered international attention and raised hopes among fervent Trump supporters and believers in disinformation that the former president's loss would be reversed. Reese called Hickman's office and left a voicemail. "Hello, Mr. Hickman. I'm glad that you're standing up for democracy, and I want to place your hand on the Bible and say that the election was honest and fair," Reese said, according to court records and an audio of the record obtained by the Post. "I really appreciate that." Reese spoke slowly and calmly, giving the initial impression that his message was one of support. Then his voice quickly changed. "When we come to lynch your stupid lying commie ass, you'll remember that you lied on the fucking Bible, you piece of shit," Reese angrily said. "You are going to die, you piece of shit. We're going to hang you. We are going to hang you." Weeks later, on December 8th of 21, Reese left a message for the Attorney General. Reese said he and his family members were victims of a crime. "Do your job, Brnovich, or you will hang with those son of a bitches in the end," Reese said. "We'll see to it. Torches and pitchforks. That's your future. do your job. Reese's attorney told the judge that at the time of the calls, there was a lot of misinformation being promulgated by Reese's family and the media. Really? At the sentencing hearing this week, Reese stood when it was his turn to speak, and he expressed remorse. First, I'd like to offer my apologies to the victims, he said. Amid his mom's time in hospice during the coronavirus pandemic, Reese said he spent hours listening to his brother ranting and raving about allegations of election improprieties. In the months after her death, Reese said he was taking medication for his own ailments that he says altered his behavior. His voice cracking, he recounted how his wife told him one day that he had called someone the night before and was screaming into the phone. Reese said he didn't know what he had done until the FBI showed up at his door. Of the Los Angeles Times brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Los Angeles City Council voted unanimously yesterday, Wednesday, to look into whether the city can sue the state of Texas and Texas Governor Greg Abbott for sending a busload of asylum seekers to L.A. on June 14th and to investigate whether Abbott's actions violated any criminal laws. The June 14 bus was first sent to L.A. by Texas. 10 more buses have arrived in the 2.5 months since, with the most recent bus arriving at Union Station during the council's Wednesday meeting. They also sent a busload or several busloads during the hurricane. How nice. The proposal directs City Attorney Heidi Feldstein Soto's office to investigate and begin proceedings on potential civil legal action that could be taken against Texas, Abbott, and any other entity relating to planning and actions of June 14, 2023. It also asked Feldstein Soto's office to investigate and report on whether human trafficking, kidnapping, or any other crime was committed on or before the day the first bus was sent. Well, this is even more steps in holding Texas and Abbott accountable. And while we ponder that, why don't we go to our break? And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is a message from CDC.
After hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods, standing water and excess moisture help mold grow in your home, garage, and other structures. When you return to a home that has been flooded, know that you're likely to have mold. Mold puts your family's health at risk. If you have mold growing in your home, you should clean it up and fix other water problems, such as leaks in roofs, walls, or plumbing. Keep your children and pets out of affected areas until you've cleaned. Control moisture in your home to prevent mold growth. To remove mold growth from hard surfaces, use commercial products, soap and water, or a bleach solution of no more than 1 cup of household laundry bleach in 1 gallon of water. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. Never mix bleach with ammonia or other household cleaners. It will produce dangerous, toxic fumes. Open windows and doors to provide fresh air.
For more information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
This is an important message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. After a storm or disaster, it's important to eat only safe food. Throw away perishables like meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and leftovers stored above 40 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours or more. Throw away food with an unusual odor, color, or texture. Throw away food that may have come in contact with floodwater, including food in swollen, punctured, and damaged cans. When in doubt, throw it out.
We're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. The American colonists came from a variety of countries. Some came seeking religious freedom, such as the Puritans in Massachusetts and the Quakers in Pennsylvania. Others immigrated to America seeking economic opportunity. Large numbers of colonists were descended from British or Irish settlers, but many others came from other parts of Europe, such as France, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, and Sweden. The colonists brought their own social structures and spoke a variety of languages. There was a large German-speaking population in Pennsylvania, for example. Not everyone came to the colonies willingly. 1/5 of the population was held in slavery. More than 300,000 Africans were taken from Africa to be enslaved in Britain's American colonies and later the United States. Those who survived the Herring Middle Passage were sold as slaves. The Middle Passage was the ocean voyage between the western coast of Africa and the North American colonies. Slavery was permitted in all the colonies, north and south. Slavery continued to be legally permitted in some states until 1865 with the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1864. That was the day the final battle of the Atlanta campaign began with the Battle of Jonesboro. The Union had been embroiled in a civil war with Confederate forces to end the slave labor system for 3.5 years. It had been a difficult summer. Battles were increasingly bloody, with casualties on both sides numbering into the tens of thousands. Criticisms intensified against key Union generals like Sherman and Grant. Pressure mounted against President Lincoln to end the war and withdraw the Emancipation Proclamation if necessary. General William T. Sherman mounted the Atlanta campaign earlier that year in May. His forces scored a number of victories throughout the summer, but could not decisively defeat Confederate forces. By August, Northern morale was so low that the Republican National Committee deemed Lincoln unelectable. The Democratic National Convention, convening in Chicago, had declared the war a failure and planned to ride to victory over Lincoln in the November elections. But Lincoln's commitment to emancipation was unwavering, and Sherman did not disappoint. He understood that Atlanta was, as historian Eric Foner describes it, a key railroad hub and the communications and transportation center for the entire Southeast. Sherman's forces had been marching down from Chattanooga for most of the summer. Finally, they marched to the south of Atlanta to cut the last key rail line. And on this day, Union forces positioned themselves at the Flint River and at the Macon and Western Railroad. Over the next 2 days, they would successfully beat back multiple Confederate assaults, destroying the rail line and forcing Confederate forces to abandon Atlanta. The city was now fully under Union occupation. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 52 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs only in the low 70s. Oh my, that's a considerable drop from days previous. And we will we are ostensibly under sunny conditions at the moment, though it is starting to cloud up because we're going to have rain showers developing in just a couple of hours and then evolve into a more steady rain in the afternoon. Winds will be light and variable, and it looks like we're going to get close to a 1/4 inch of rain today, and then cloudy with occasional rain showers overnight. Lows in the upper 50s, winds remaining light and variable. Looks like we're going to get something a little less than a 1/4 inch of rain. So there's that. And let's see. Rain showers tomorrow, Friday, with highs in the low 70s. Looks like we're going to get another 1/4 inch of rain. It looks like we'll have thunderstorms developing in the afternoon, winds light and variable, and then rain again with thunderstorms on Saturday. Our highs will be in the low to mid 70s, and then on Sunday starts inching up into the 80s as the rain looks like it'll be discontinued. Well, at least we're getting some now. Ragweed pollen is rated as low here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region here in the Rogue River Valley is registering unhealthy at 111 parts per million, though I have to say the gauge here at the mothership says something considerably less than that, though it isn't healthy. So anyway, the daytime UV index is high at level 7, so continue to take care. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.92 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles. And relative humidity is at 95%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. And that is the Weather Underground. It just is. London is 60 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 64 degrees with showers in the vicinity. Rome is 80 degrees and fair. Kabul is 76 and fair. Kyiv is 80 degrees and cloudy. Hong Kong is 82 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 82 and partly cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 52 degrees and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees and partly cloudy with a small craft advisory on the bay because of wind. Chicago, Illinois is 70 degrees and sunny, and New York, New York is 72 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Police in Cyprus say they have arrested 21 people and used tear gas and a water cannon after a group of Greek Cypriots wearing hoods and brandishing bats tried to attack protesting Syrians in a small village that has been a hotbed of tensions between locals and migrants. Police said on Tuesday parallel protests by some 250 Syrians and an equal number of Greek Cypriots in the village of Choloraka in the island southwest on Monday evening denigrated into violence as smaller numbers of protesters from both groups began setting fire to garbage bins and also torching a building's fence. Anti-riot squad officers managed to keep the two groups separated, while one officer suffered second-degree burns to his hand from a Molotov cocktail hurled by rioters. Police spokesperson said that the clashes began when Greek Cypriots attempted to assault the migrants. The spokesperson said 9 Greek Cypriots and a dozen migrants were detained. They face charges including weapons possession and causing violence. The clashes followed violence days earlier when 2 migrants and a Greek Cypriot man were detained after hundreds of the village residents marched in protest of what they said was the ghettoization of their village because of a large number of migrants settling there in recent years. The president of Cyprus strongly condemned the incidents, telling reporters that violence solves nothing and only gives rise to more violence.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Associated Press staff bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Guatemalan prosecutors arrested the former representative of a United Nations-backed anti-corruption commission that was expelled from the country several years ago. The arrest of Claudia Gonzalez is the latest chapter in the government's systematic pursuit of those who worked with the UN anti-corruption mission, best known by its Spanish initials CICIG. Interviewed outside the courthouse after her arrest, Gonzalez said the charges were strange. She said she was charged with abuse of authority by a public servant when in fact she was not a government employee, when she served as legal representative of the CICIG. Gonzalez has most recently been acting as defense attorney for some of the dozens of former anti-corruption prosecutors and officials facing legal action from the current administration. President Giametti's administration has been accused by civil society organizations and foreign governments of systemically pursuing those who worked with the UN mission. Some 30 judges, magistrates, and prosecutors involved in the investigation or processing of those corruption cases have been forced to flee the country after facing legal action. Perhaps the CICIG's greatest achievement was the investigation of and prosecution of President Molina, who was forced to resign along with his cabinet in 2015. Over 12 years, the CICIG supported Guatemala's Special Prosecutor's Office against impunity in dismantling dozens of criminal networks while at the same time building its capacity to handle complex corruption cases. Then, President Jimmy Morales ended the CICIG mission in 2019 while he was under investigation. The U.S. government has sharply criticized the weakening of anti-corruption efforts in Guatemala, and last year canceled the U.S. visa of current Guatemalan Attorney General Consuela Porras, who had been pursuing former prosecutors who conducted corruption investigations. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.